Hello and welcome to the Commander's Quarters. I'm your host Mitch, glad to have you here. If this is your first time, let me give you a quick rundown on how the show works. Here on the Commander's Quarters, we build fun and inexpensive focused commander decks. A focused commander deck is going to be more tuned than a casual deck, but not quite to the level of a competitive or optimized deck. Each and every single one of our decks is built on a strict budget of $25. That's $25 for 100 cards. Now that you understand the premise of the show, let's get on with the show. Today's commander is going to be Lyzolda, the Blood Witch. Lyzolda costs 1 black and a red, is a 3/1 human cleric, and has pay 2, sacrifice a creature. Lyzolda the Blood Witch deals 2 damage to target creature or player if the sacrificed creature was red, draw a card if the sacrificed creature was black. There are many ways that you can go about building a deck with Lyzolda as the commander, but what really interested me was that she's one of the very few commanders that can sacrifice herself. Since whenever your commander dies, it goes straight back to the command zone, you can just keep recasting her over and over again. This means that if you can produce an infinite amount of mana, you can cast Lyzolda as many times as you please. And each time you sacrifice her, you'll get to deal 2 damage to either a creature or player, and then draw a card. So our strategy for this deck is pretty straightforward. We're going to stay alive while trying to set up one of our combos to produce infinite mana. And then to win with this deck, we're going to cast Lyzolda with that infinite mana and sacrifice her as many times as needed. As with every Commander's Quarters deck, I'm going to break this deck down into 10 different tactics that show you how the deck works and how you're going to win with it. Let's go on to tactic number 1, Combo Breaker. With this tactic, I'm going to show you the different combos that are in this deck that produce infinite mana. Every combo in this deck revolves around the card Worldgorger Dragon. When Worldgorger Dragon enters the battlefield, we're going to exile all other permanents we control, and then when he leaves the battlefield, we'll return those permanents back to play. Now those permanents come back into play untapped, including lands, so if we can find a way to continuously do this, we can produce infinite mana with those untapped lands. The first of our combos is going to be the old school version of this combo, and it works with Animate Dead. Animate Dead is an aura, and the oracle text reads like this. Enchant creature card in a graveyard. When Animate Dead enters the battlefield, if it's on the battlefield, it loses enchant creature card in a graveyard and gains enchant creature put onto the battlefield with Animate Dead. Return enchanted creature card to the battlefield under your control and attach Animate Dead to it. When Animate Dead leaves the battlefield, that creature's controller sacrifices it. And then it has enchanted creature gets -1/-0. So how exactly does this combo work? Let me show you. First, we need Worldgorger Dragon in our graveyard. Then we're going to cast Animate Dead targeting him. Animate Dead will bring him onto the battlefield under our control, and he will exile all of our permanents, including Animate Dead. When Animate Dead leaves play, it's going to force us to sacrifice the Worldgorger Dragon. When that happens, Animate Dead and all of our other permanents will return to the battlefield under our control, and we will retarget Worldgorger Dragon with Animate Dead. Again, all of our permanents are going to come back into play untapped, including our lands. Now, as long as we don't have lands that themselves come into play tapped, we will have infinite mana since we can just tap our lands for mana, then they will exile, come back untapped, and do it again. There is one stipulation to this combo, however. In order to stop this combination from happening, we need to have another target for Animate Dead to end it. So that means there needs to be another creature in either our graveyard or someone else's graveyard for us to target with Animate Dead. Otherwise, we will be forced to target Worldgorger Dragon and the game will end in a draw. So as long as we have the combo set up properly and no one stops it, we will be able to produce infinite mana and cast Lyzolda as many times as we want. Now with any combo, it's a good idea to have multiple ways that you can get that combo off. Dance of the Dead pretty much does the exact same thing as Animate Dead, so it's a great addition to the deck. Then we have another way of comboing off with either Flameshadow Conjuring or Minion Reflector. When you cast Worldgorger Dragon with either of these on the battlefield, 2 triggers are going to happen. First, you're going to stack his exile trigger, and then you're going to copy him. When you create a copy of him, now you have 2 exile triggers. First, you're going to exile everything except for the token Worldgorger Dragon, triggering the return of no permanents exiled from the original Worldgorger Dragon. Then you have to exile the token Worldgorger Dragon, triggering the return of all of your other permanents, including the original Worldgorger Dragon. You can repeat this as many times as you want, though this does require a little more setup because you do need the additional mana to pay in order to create the token. To end the cycle on this one, you simply have to not pay to create a token of him. Then he will come back into play and exile all your other permanents, but you will have infinite mana. With that infinite mana, you can cast Lyzolda as many times as needed to kill your opponents. If you need any more information on how these combos work, there's some links in the description below. Alright, now that we understand how the combo works in this deck, let's go through the other pieces that help make the deck work. On to tactic number 2, Worthy Sacrifices. Again, with Animate Dead and Dance of the Dead, there needs to be another creature in a graveyard to make sure that this game doesn't end in a draw. So for our ramp package for this deck, we are running quite a few mana dorks that can do that for us. First up, there's Soldavi Adnate, which is probably the best mana dork in this deck. She can tap and sacrifice a black or artifact creature, including herself, to add an amount of black mana equal to that creature's converted mana cost. Then Milliken can tap to add a colorless to our mana pool, and it's also going to take the top card of our library, which might be a creature, and put it into our graveyard. Then there's Bogwitch, where we can pay a black and tap and discard a card, which could be a creature card, and then add black to our mana pool. Then we are running some regular mana dorks, but we have plenty of ways to get them into the graveyard if needed. Iron Mirror is going to tap for red, and Leaden Mirror will tap for black. Then there's Mannequin, Hedron Crawler, and Plague Mirror, each of which just tap for a colorless. Plague Mirror does have an effect, but that won't come into play in this deck. Since this is a combo deck, we want to get things out as quickly as possible. So we're going to need to run some more cheap ramp to make that happen. Let's go into tactic number 3, Light Rock. Charcoal Diamond will enter the battlefield tapped and tap for black. Then there's Fire Diamond, which does the same, but it taps for a red. If we pay 1 into Rakdos Signet, we can tap it for a black and a red. Then we're running Wayfarer's Bauble, which we can pay 2 and sack it to search our library for a basic land card and put into play tapped. Alright, so we've got our mana ramp figured out, but we need to make sure that we can get a creature into our graveyard or one of our opponent's graveyards. Board wipes are usually a good way to do this, and they're also a way to protect us. Let's see how our red board wipes do it in tactic number 4, Burn in Love. Caldera Hellion has Devour 1, and when it comes into play, it's going to deal 3 damage to each creature. We are guaranteed to have at least one creature in our graveyard with this card, since it will either devour one of our creatures, or it will kill itself with that 3 damage. Then there's Creator Hellion, which when it enters the battlefield, it's going to deal 4 damage to each other creature. It also has an Echo cost, so if we don't pay that the next upkeep, we're going to have to sacrifice it. Then there's Ryusei the Falling Star, which when it dies, it's going to deal 5 damage to each creature without flying. We're also running Slagstorm in this deck, and for the most part, we're going to choose its first mode and deal 3 damage to each creature. Inferno is an instant that will deal 6 damage to each creature and each player, and 6 damage is generally enough to kill pretty much everything. Then we have 2 X damage spells at instant speed. First, there's going to be Starstorm. It's going to deal X damage to each creature, and we can also cycle it if needed. Then there's Magma Quake, which is going to deal X damage to each creature without flying and each planeswalker. Finally, we have some cards that cost a bit less, but can still wipe the entire board with the right situation. First up is Arc Bond. It's an instant and says choose target creature. Whenever that creature is dealt damage this turn, it deals that much damage to each other creature and each player. So say we have one of our mana dorks in play, and someone attacks us with a big creature. We can block with our mana dork and then have it deal damage equal to the amount of damage it's taking to every single creature. Then there's Chain Reaction, which is a sorcery, and it says Chain Reaction deals X damage to each creature where X is the number of creatures on the battlefield. Generally in Commander games, there are a lot of creatures in play, so this will usually just wipe the entire board. Damage-based Wraths aren't the only ones that we're using in this deck, though. Let's go on to tactic number 5, All the Small Things. When we morph Bane of the Living, we can pay X black, and it's going to give all creatures -X until the end of the turn. Then there's Night Incarnate, which has whenever it leaves the battlefield, all creatures get -3 until the end of the turn. It even has an Evoke cost, which comes in especially effective if we need to get into the graveyard and have the same effect. Languish is a sorcery that's going to give all creatures -4 until the end of the turn. Then there's Yahenni's Experience, which will give all creatures -3 until the end of the turn. And it's going to let us cast a card with a converted mana cost of 3 or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. We're not done with Wraths quite just yet. It's time to go on to tactic number 6, Wrath City. We are going to be running 3 Wraths that pretty much guarantee that a few creatures will die. First up, we have Last One Standing, where we will choose a creature at random and then destroy the rest. Then there's Crux of Fate, which will let us choose to destroy all dragons or all non-dragon creatures. Extinguish All Hope is going to destroy all non-enchantment creatures. Again, we're running all 16 of these Wraths, not only to protect ourselves, but also to ensure that we can get at least one creature in a graveyard so that we can combo off. Now let's get to how we find those combo pieces. It's time for tactic number 7, Digging Down. We are running a ton of draw spells in this deck because we need to find those combo pieces quick. First up, we have Sign in Blood, which will let us draw 2 cards, but we lose 2 life. Read the Bones will let us do the exact same thing, but we get to scry 2 first. Then there's Dark Bargain, which we can cast at instant speed. We're going to look at the top 3 cards of our library. 2 of them go into our hand, 1 goes into the graveyard, and then it deals 2 damage to us. This card is great since if we hit Worldgorger Dragon, we get to put him straight into the graveyard. Then there's Siphon Mine, which will make each of our opponents discard a card, then we draw a card for each card discarded this way. Most of the time, that's going to be 3 cards. Then there's Ambition's Cost and Ancient Craving, both of which do the exact same thing. We're going to draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. Promise of Power is a huge draw spell. It's going to make us draw 5 cards and lose 5 life. It does have a second mode, but we're probably never going to use that. Then there's Necrologia, which is an instant, but we can only cast it during our end step. It says, as an additional cost to cast Necrologia, pay X life, draw X cards. Since we have to cast this during our end step, we will have to discard any number of cards over 7, but this can be beneficial to us. If we're at a high enough life total, we can pay upwards of 10 life trying to dig for those combo pieces. And this card works even better if we happen to hit Worldgorger Dragon, because then we can just discard it. Next is Skeletal Scrying, which is an instant that costs X and a black, and it says, as an additional cost to cast Skeletal Scrying, exile X cards from your graveyard. You draw X cards and lose X life. While we are limited by the number of cards in our graveyard, we should have no problem filling that graveyard up with this deck. So what are some other ways we're going to fill up our graveyard? Let's go on to tactic number 8, in and out. There will be times where we have Worldgorger Dragon in our hand and need to get him into our graveyard, so we have some cards that can help us out with that. First off, there's Faithless Looting, which will let us draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards, and we can even flash it back for 2 in a red. Then there's Tormenting Voice and Wild Guess, which both do the exact same thing. As an additional cost to cast them, we're going to have to discard a card, but then we get to draw 2 cards. To cast Cathartic Reunion, we'll have to discard 2 cards, but then we get to draw 3 cards. Then we have Moonlight Bargain, which is an instant that says, look at the top 5 cards of your library. For each card, put that card into your graveyard unless you pay 2 life, then put the rest into your hand. Worldgorger Dragon goes straight into the graveyard with this card, and we can pay 2 life for other combo pieces that we need. Then there's Shatter Perception, which is going to let us discard our entire hand and then draw that many cards, and it's got flashback for 5 in a red. Collective Defiance has 3 modes. The one that we're going to use the most is the first, in that we're going to discard all the cards in our hand and then draw that many cards. And if we need to deal 4 damage to a creature or 3 damage to an opponent, we can simply escalate the spell. Then we have Corvas Fury, which says, for each player choose friend or foe. Each friend discards all cards from their hand, then draws that many cards plus 1. Corvas Fury deals damage to each foe equal to the number of cards in their hand. The great thing about this card is that it gets around hexproof, so if any of our opponents have something in play that gives them hexproof, this can be a secondary win condition for us. If we can't target that opponent with Lyzolda's ability, we can simply cast Corvas Fury over and over again, making them draw cards. The ironic thing is that we will be choosing them as a friend, even though we are milling them out. Or if they have enough cards in their hand, we can just choose them as a foe to ping them to death. Finally, we have Magus of the Wheel, which we can sacrifice by paying 1 in a red to make every single player discard their hand and then draw 7 cards. So say that we've drawn all these cards and still haven't found those right combo pieces. What do we do next? Let's go on to tactic number 9, Dragon Hunting. We can transmute Shred Memory for 1 black in order to go search for either Animate Dead or Dawn of the Dead. Brainspoil does double duty in this deck. It can either destroy a creature that isn't enchanted, or we can transmute it for 1 black. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, our dragon costs 6 though, so what are we going to be transmuting this for? Most of the time in this deck, we actually don't want the dragon in our hand. Brainspoil can search for our golden pig in this deck though, and we'll get to that here in a minute. When Corpse Connoisseur enters the battlefield, we're going to search our library for our dragon and put him into the graveyard. We can even do this while the Corpse Connoisseur is in our graveyard by unearthing him. Then there's Diabolic Tutor, which can just go get us any card in our deck and put it into our hand. Razaketh's Right does the exact same thing for 1 more mana, but we can also cycle it for black. Then there's Demonic Collusion, which will go get us a card for that exact same price, but we can also buy it back by discarding 2 cards. This can come in huge when trying to set up our combo and get Worldgorger Dragon into the graveyard. While Demonic Collusion is a fantastic tutor and it does cost 5, it is not going to be our target for Brainspoil. The card that we would be searching for is Final Parting, which is the golden pig of our deck. Again, the golden pig of our Commander's Quarters decks is going to be the number 1 card out of the 99. Final Parting is a sorcery that costs 3 black, and it says, search your library for 2 cards, put 1 into your hand and the other into your graveyard, then shuffle your library. This card automatically sets up our combo. We simply search for the dragon and Animate Dead. Animate Dead will go into our hand and the dragon will go into our graveyard. And the best part is, if we have access to 2 more mana, we can just cast Animate Dead and then win the game. If not, we just wait 1 turn, cast it, and then win right then. This is the only card in our deck that can set us up to win this quickly on its own, which is why it earned the title of the Golden Pig. Then we have our last tutor, which is not as good as Final Parting, but still very good in its own right. Behold the Beyond will make us discard our entire hand, and then we can search our library for 3 cards, put them into our hand, and then shuffle our library. If Worldgorger Dragon's already in our hand, we just get to discard him and search for the other combo pieces. If not, we can just go get all the combo pieces to help us win. Combos can be fragile, but we can plan ahead to make sure that our combo goes off right. So let's go on to tactic number 10, Contingency Plan. First off, we have Imp's Mischief, which is basically a counter-counter spell. Imp's Mischief reads, change the target of target spell with a single target. You lose life equal to that spell's converted mana cost. So say that someone tries to counter Animate Dead when we're targeting our Worldgorger dragon. We cast Imp's Mischief and change the target of that counterspell to Imp's Mischief. Both spells will then fizzle and our combo is secure. Imp's Mischief can also change any targeted removal towards one of our combo pieces, so that also helps. Chaos Warp comes in huge in this deck. If one of our opponents has something like a Rest in Peace in play, we need to get rid of it because that just shuts our entire combo down. Chaos Warp will force them to shuffle that card into their library and then reveal the top card, and then if it's a permanent, it comes onto the battlefield. Chances are, it won't be the card we got rid of. Then we have Phyrexian Delver, which when he enters the battlefield will return any creature from our graveyard back to the battlefield, but will lose life equal to that card's converted mana cost. So say that plan A is out the window. Both Animate Dead and Dawn of the Dead were countered and they're in our graveyards, and we have Worldgorger Dragon stuck in our graveyard. If we have 6 mana and Flameshadow Conjuring in play, we simply cast the Delver, get our dragon back, and combo off. Again, when we are going infinite and casting and sacrificing Lyzolda continuously, we will be drawing a ton of cards. If we are playing against a life gain deck, we might not be able to do enough damage to them and might just mill ourselves out before doing so. And that's where Elixir of Immortality comes into play. We can pay 2 and sacrifice it, and then gain 5 life, shuffle it and our graveyard back into our library. We can do this as many times as we want since we have infinite mana and we can draw infinite amounts of cards. This deck may revolve around one kind of combo, but it is a resilient one. There are multiple ways that we can go off with it and generate infinite mana. And once we have that infinite mana, it is nearly impossible to stop Lyzolda from winning us the game. It is also a deck that protects itself very well early on in the game by wrathing the board continuously. While this is a focused deck and nowhere near the level of a competitive deck, it can go off on turn 2 with the right hand. And with that, keep in mind that combo decks like this one aren't right for everyone and they're not always the right fit for a playgroup. But if it's a deck that you like to play and your playgroup's fine with it, then go for it. And now that we've gone through all the cards that help you win with this deck, let's go through the cards that help make it work. It's time to go through the mana base. We are going to be running 36 lands in this deck, including some non-basics. Cinder Barons, Rakdos, Guildgate, and Urborg Volcano all do the exact same thing. They're going to enter the battlefield tapped and then add either a black or a red. Then there's Akuum Refuge and Bloodfell Caves. Both enter the battlefield tapped, gain us a life, and tap for either a black or a red. Now while those lands are great for fixing, unfortunately they won't help us go infinite since they enter the battlefield tapped. Cinder Marsh and Lantern Lit Graveyard can both tap for either a colorless or tap for black and red, but they don't untap during our next untap step. When we're going infinite though, this doesn't matter and these cards come in huge since they can tap for either red or black and then they come back into play untapped. And then there's Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which can be sacrificed to search our library for a basic land and put into play tapped. Unfortunately, Rocky Tar Pit will also not help us combo off, but it is good for mana fixing by being able to sacrifice it to search our library for a swamp or mountain. Grixis Panorama and Jund Panorama will help us with that combo though, as long as we have 1 mana open to sacrifice them. Finally, we are going to be running 13 swamps and 11 mountains in this deck. Again, the majority of lands in our deck do help us with our combo. We also need to make sure that we have both of our colors when we go off so that we can cast Lyzolda. And now that we've talked about every single card in the deck, including the lands, let's go through a quick price check. As a reminder, our deck costs are calculated using TCG Player Optimization, optimizing with even heavily played and damaged cards because those cards need a home too. The average Lyzolda deck on EDH Rec is going to set you back $272.95. Let's see how we compare. Our deck comes in just under budget at $24.96. Again, our Commander's Quarters decks are built to be tuned and focused within that $25 budget, but there are always ways that we can improve on them. Let's go through some reasonable upgrades to see what some of those ways just might be. First off, we have Necromancy at $9.37. Necromancy basically does the exact same thing as Animate Dead and Dawn of the Dead, but we can cast it at instant speed. Having an extra copy of that effect is huge for this deck. Speaking of which, we've got Kiki-Jiki Mirrorbreaker, who comes in at $7.28. With Kiki-Jiki on the battlefield and Worldgorger Dragon coming into play, we can create a token that's a copy of him and start that infinite combo. Again, adding as many repeatable effects to a combo deck is huge. Then we've got Buried Alive, which comes in at $1.90. It will allow us to search our library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into our graveyard. This card is very effective at just getting Worldgorger Dragon into the graveyard, which is where we usually want him. Then there's Blasphemous Act, which costs $1.35. Many times in Commander, this card just cost us a single red to cast because of all the creatures on the battlefield, and then it will deal 13 damage to each and every creature. This is an extremely cheap and affordable Wrath if you're willing to stretch the budget just a bit. Then we have Life's Finale coming in at $1.49. There are plenty of Wraths out there that are just strictly better than some of the ones that we use in this deck, including Life's Finale. Life's Finale destroys all creatures, and then we get to search an opponent's library for up to 3 creature cards and put them into their graveyard. This can just straight up replace one of our Wraths like Extinguish All Hope. Finally, we've got Dark Petition at $1.99. Dark Petition will search our library for a card and put it into our hand, and if we have Spell Mastery, it's going to add black, black, black to our mana pool. With the right setup, this card can just help us go off right away. Now that we've looked at current Commander cards, though, let's look to the future. It's time for our next section, Looking Ahead. Here in this section, we're going to look at recent cards that have come out and talk about how they might impact the world of Commander. With the most recent set being Commander 2018 coming out, the card that I want to discuss today is Blood Tracker, which comes in at $1.27. Blood Tracker costs 3 and a black, is a 2/2 vampire wizard with flying, and has black, pay 2 life, put a +1/+1 counter on Blood Tracker, and when Blood Tracker leaves the battlefield, draw a card for each +1/+1 counter on it. What I find so interesting about Blood Tracker is he's basically greed on a stick. Although the payoff is an immediate life greed, there are some benefits to having this on a creature. Since you can just pump him for each black mana that you have open, it makes it very hard to attack into you or to block him. Also, there are plenty of ways that we can get +1/+1 counters on him other than his own ability. I can see him working very well in a green-black deck that focuses on +1/+1 counters. But I really just want to hear about what you think about Blood Tracker, so let me know in the comments below. Do you think this card's going to be good in the right deck? And that about wraps up our show today. Thank you so much for watching. In the description below, you'll find the link to this deck list, as well as the links to our Facebook and Twitter, so make sure you reach out and say hi. Also in the description, you'll find a link to the Commander's Quarters Patreon page, and I just want to say a quick thank you to the patrons who have subscribed so far. There are many benefits to being a patron of the Commander's Quarters, including being able to vote on future Commanders for deck techs. If you enjoyed this deck tech, please like it, subscribe to the channel, and check out some of our other deck techs. And with that, I'm out of here. Thanks again, and have a good one.